Again, welcome to the Pipeline Safety Trust Conference here in New Orleans. Welcome to our webcasters who are back up this morning, I guess, after being lost for half a day because of people who didn't call before they did something out there. We've got a pretty full agenda through mid-afternoon. We're going to be in here first thing this morning to hear our keynote, and then we're going to do breakouts for the rest of the day. I'm just going to do a couple of shout-outs for the breakouts, just so you kind of know a little bit. The one in here this morning is going to be on kind of oversight, who oversees the regulators, with kind of a particular emphasis on how much oversight is there on all the state regulators. As we heard yesterday, the state inspectors make up a huge part of the workforce. How does PHMSA provide oversight of those folks? But in the other room is going to be a discussion of pipeline safety management systems, which I, provided the jibber-jabber comment on yesterday. But if you look at pipeline safety management systems or safety management systems in general, most other industries, be it airlines, chemical industry, have adopted safety management systems over the years, and they really see that as when they kind of get to a plateau on safety like pipeline safety may be at this point, that's the way to move safety forward into the next realm of really trying to get to zero systems. So I really encourage people not to pay too much attention to my marketing technique of calling it jibber-jabber, but to take the opportunity to go over and listen to the three people that are on the committee trying to help design pipeline safety management systems. And there's going to be a pretty informal discussion in that room. And the other thing is the presentations in this room are going to be, they're being captured and they'll be available to watch anytime on into the future. The one over there is not, so it's kind of your chance this morning to really talk about safety management systems. With that, I just wanted to provide a couple of highlights of last night. We managed to do the beignet walk last night, and I did a head count at one point. We had almost 60 people over there, so it was pretty outstanding walk, although we left beignets on the table, which is, I think, a crime. It was a lot of fun. I also have some pictures of some people on Bourbon Street later in the evening, but we'll save those to when I need them. But I did want to make an award for who has the biggest problem eating beignets, because and this is what happens when you try to wear a black suit Yeah, you're welcome, Sean. And to be fair, it wasn't totally Sean's fault. We tried to avoid the food fight after that, but so we're going to move right on to our first, our keynote speaker, who is Tim Felt. He's the president and CEO of Colonial Pipeline, and he's going to be speaking about industry initiatives to make things safer. I heard Tim speak at an API conference, I think it was 2 years ago. And he did an amazing keynote speak to the American Petroleum Institute at that time. So I'm really looking forward to Tim's talk today, and I'm going to find his presentation and get it going here. The one thing we haven't done much is we haven't spent a lot of time introducing our speakers. Most everybody's bios are in your packet, and they're also online on the conference website, because we have some pretty impressive people speaking, but we haven't spent a lot of time explaining that. So let me get this up, and I'll turn it over to you, Tim. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Carl. I appreciate that, and I really appreciate being here today. I'll tell you that I'm not used to speaking behind a podium, so I hope I'm not too uncomfortable. Usually I like to just kind of wing it and walk around. If I did that, I wouldn't be able to cover all the material, but it'd probably be a pretty interesting conversation because you never know how it turns out. What I'd like to do, though, is I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about Colonial Pipeline, some of the things that we're doing, and then I'm going to talk about some of the industry initiatives. And some of the things we're doing at Colonial, I'm going to say are representative of what the industry is doing, but you can bring them both together and see what you think. If there's time remaining, I'll open up for questions at the end. I understand you're getting a copy of the presentation, so I'm not going to read every slide if that's okay. A little bit about Colonial. We celebrated our 50-year anniversary last year. We're a refined products pipeline, which means we move gasoline, diesel fuel, jet fuel, heating oil We got 29 refineries we're connected to in the Gulf Coast. We delivered about 270 different locations along the southeast and the northeast. So we're really connected at origin and destination to a lot of places, and that gives our customers a lot of optionality. That's important to them, probably not that important to you, but it makes us pretty important. We service 7 airports and 5 military installations. So we get a lot of attention from Department of Defense, Homeland Security. A lot of those folks are pretty interested in what we do. 100 million gallons a day is what we deliver. And we deliver that for 4.5 cents a gallon from Houston all the way up to New York. So we're a very efficient pipeline. Gives us a lot of opportunity with the flexibility that we have. But we're 40-inch diameter is the biggest pipeline we have. And I was going to bring a tape in, but I think 40 inches is about that tall. So there's a nickname for pipelines that big, and they're big pipelines. We call it, so some people call them BAPs, big pipelines. You could fill in the blanks. Colonial's been, I've been president of Colonial now for about 5 years, and I'm very proud of the company and what we do, but I have to tell you, Colonial's had a long history of focusing on safety. Now, they don't have a perfect record. We're not perfect today, and we've learned some hard lessons in the past. But as a result of that, we've learned those lessons and tried to get our act together. A big focus on safety. Safety is an individual, safety for the pipeline itself and the communities that we pass through. We understand we go through schoolyards, shopping centers, people's backyards, under rivers, near airports, across airports. That's a big responsibility. And when you've got a 40-inch diameter pipeline or maybe even a little bit smaller, a mishap is a pretty significant deal. We take that pretty seriously. One of the things I want to talk about, and this is, to me, it seems like the right thing to do. Earlier this week, I had a debriefing on an unannounced drill that we had, an unannounced spill drill. We put these into place probably 3 years ago, I think it was, 2 or 3 years ago. We drill and we practice and we train for emergency response quite a bit. When I look at the risks to the pipeline and what we need to do is, from a core standpoint, we need to spend a lot of effort preventing an incident. I mean, there's a slide in here. I think we spend like $100 million on the avoidance part of it. Then we have to spend time and effort detecting if we do have something, whether it's a big one or a small one. But if we have a failure, we've got to be able to respond. And there's been some significant failures over the last few years that get a lot of attention. And personally, Colonial had a couple of those back in the 90s. I kind of look at what's happening in the industry and said, we can't let that happen to us. And so the money spent on prevention, detection, but also response. Because if we have an incident, we get one chance to do it right. And unfortunately, somebody made a comment to me, I don't know, maybe last year sometime, somebody in the company, and they said, we used to be pretty good at this. Yeah, they were pretty good because we had the experience. That's not how you want to be good. You want to be good because you're practicing, and that's what we do. So we train a lot. The business units train. The company trains. We put on training classes. We do tabletop drills. And I look at unannounced drills. My philosophy, and I've shared this with others in the company, is that I relate it to football. And so hopefully you follow along. A quarterback can throw the ball to the receivers all day, and they get good at catching passes. Sometime, though, you've got to be able to take the snap from the center and then go back and throw a pass. It helps if you have the lineman at some point practicing with the rest of the offense. And then at some point, you have to practice against the defense. But ultimately, the best preparation for a game is a scrimmage, where you've got, again, another team. So you've got kind of like that. You don't know what's coming up next. To me, that's what the unannounced drill is. We don't want to practice with a situation, but the closest thing we can get is an unannounced drill. And so that's what we do. We just tell our folks we're going to have an unannounced drill sometime during the year. And you should see the attendance at the training sessions pick up because they don't know where it's going to be. and it could be in their area. And we saw, when you have training, you go, well, I've got this coming up, and I've got something else coming up, and your attendance isn't always so great. But when they think that there's an unannounced drill and it could be in their area, they want to be ready for it. So we've had a couple of these now. The debrief that we had just recently said that we've made some good improvements, and that's something to be proud of. But we also had people, we exposed ourselves to some things that were not very good. Significant room for improvement. The interesting thing was we involved our local regulators, and I think we had PHMSA folks there that participated in the drill as well. They spoke frankly, first of all, saying thank you that you exposed some of your warts. But they also complimented us on the fact that we were trying to do the right things. And I share that with you because we're not the only ones in the industry that are doing that, but we're doing it because we want to do it and we're seeing the value in it. And there's efforts in the industry to try and do the same thing at different levels. So hopefully we'll see more of those unannounced drills. I mentioned before $100 million in the integrity pipeline. It's going to be a little bit higher next year. In fact, our integrity spending, if you look at just the integrity spending, it's always going up. And that's not a bad thing. It doesn't mean that things are getting worse. It means we're getting better. That's the way I look at it. The expectations are higher for sure, but we're getting better information. Our tools are better. As we dig, we learn more. As we share information with other companies, we learn more. We learn more about what to look for. We're getting better data, so we're probably spending more money maintaining the pipeline. There's some statistics here on barrels lost, and if you did the percentages, I think at one point it was, if you were looking at a quality thing, it was like 99.99999%, good. But if you apply that to the airline industry, then you'd only have a couple of planes falling out of the sky every year. Our goal is 0 because we don't want to have a single gallon or a single barrel spilled anywhere. We're not at 0. We've got room to improve, but that's our goal. And I look at the goal from a pipeline safety the same as I do the goal from a personal safety standpoint. So when we talk about safety in the company, if we get our incidents down to like only 1 or 2 incidents, personal safety incidents a year, that could be really good, unless you're the person who had the incident, right? So 39 barrels, that's not a lot of barrels when you're looking at the billion-plus barrels that we're moving. Well, it's not much unless that 39 barrels was in your backyard, right? And if you had a sandbox in your backyard and your kids were playing in that sandbox, that wouldn't be acceptable. So why is it ever acceptable? And the point is it's not. Okay, there's some places that could be worse than others, but it's never acceptable. And that's the philosophy that we have. I'll tell you we're not there, but that's where we want to go, and that's why we want to go there. Let me talk a little bit about the industry, because the industry's made a lot of progress over the years. Incidents along the right-of-way, and we look at the right-of-way incidents as probably being the most important ones because the right-of-way, where the pipeline goes through other people's properties, and that's where we focus most of our attention on. We focus a lot on facilities as well. We see a big opportunity in our facilities, but first we're trying to focus on the right-of-way. We made some significant efforts along the right-of-way. Here's some graphs. I'm going to talk about them a little bit because if you'll notice towards the end of those graphs what they look like, but we've had some significant progress over the years. Okay? Corrosion, third-party damage and failures. But if you look at the most recent years, and these are, I think, smoothing 3-year averages or something in the red, you can see that we don't have that same amount of decline, that same rate of improvement. It's kind of tapered off. And in fact, we looked at this taper a number of years ago, and I'll just say that when we looked at the graphs, and we were really proud of that reduction, and we've shown that a number of times, how we've improved as an industry. But at some point, we weren't looking at the last couple of years as critically, self-critically. And when we started doing that, we said, you know what? It was great that we made that progress. And when we started seeing that curve flatten off or maybe bump up a little bit, we had to ask ourselves some hard questions. First of all, why? Secondly, is it a trend or is it just a bump in the road? And you never know until years later. And so as an industry, we said, do we really want to sit back and wait and see what it looks like a couple of years from now? Do we have to wait for somebody to tell us to do better? And we took a look at some of the data, we dug a little bit deeper, and we started prioritizing and refocusing some of our improvement efforts, and came up with some initiatives that I'll cover a little bit later. In some areas, I showed where we've made some significant progress. In some areas, not such good progress, and we understand that. So, as I've said before, we've made some good progress, but as an industry, not just Colonial Pipeline, but as an industry, we've committed to getting to zero. Now, we're not going to get to zero next year, I can tell you that. I can probably guess that we won't be at zero the year after that, unfortunately. But zero is where we want to go, and we're not going to give up till we get there. We made progress in some significant areas, but others still have room for improvement. Okay, so as we pursue this, here's again some interesting statistics on the amount of money we spend, on the amount of digs, the tool runs that we make, the internal inspections. I think probably this is a group that understands smart pigs, right? And all that. So the pig runs, the miles of pipe, the digs. I'd probably say that my guess is, and I don't have data from years previous, but I would say that in our company, for example, the number of digs are down. And that's because we found so many things. In fact, at one point, when you run the tools and you do your digs and you make your corrections, you think, well, we got it all, until you run another tool. And when you run a tool that gives you even better data, you can look at a better level and correct things even further in advance of a failure. That's trying to reduce our overall risk in the pipeline. And that's what we do. We try to look at, as a company, and I think all the companies are the same, you look at your biggest risk areas, you focus on them, and you reduce your overall risk profile. Okay? We're probably doing fewer digs, but we're getting better and better. We're reducing the risk more and more. So we've had a number of initiatives over the years. Some of them continue. Some of them have been completed. More recently, when we've come together as a pipeline leadership group, we've focused on these 4 areas, and actually it says 4, but if you really read between the lines, it's probably like 6 or 7, and we had a big discussion about, what do we do with the ones from last year? Do we have 6 or 7, or is it really only 4? So we took 6 or 7, we packaged them into 4 so that it wouldn't look like we had too many to focus on. But the point is we were making some good progress in some areas, and we didn't want to drop those programs and then just to focus on a few others. I'm going to cover them in a little bit of detail, not too much. I don't want to, again, you're going to get the presentation. But the first one, for example, inspection technologies, there's a lot of focus on research and development. The industry spends money collectively and individually. There's companies that have their own departments doing research and development. But one of the things that the industry's done, the liquid industry and the gas pipeline industry have pooled their dollars together, because a pipeline is a pipeline. So if Colonial spends money on R&D, that's great. But if we can pool that money with other people, we can do even more R&D and more focused R&D. And that's what we're trying to do. Anyway, a lot of the projects that we're focusing on in the next couple of years have to do with crack technology. Threat detection, you can read the charts. ERW seams, inspection technology, I talked about some of that. Crack detection, threat data integration programs. The idea, we're having a discussion, with someone earlier this morning. And you can have your crack data, and you can have your corrosion data, you can have your geometry or dent type of data. There's a lot of information to come together. How do you integrate it and not just overlay it, but then interpret what you've overlaid? And that's a challenge for us. I mean, that's an opportunity to get better. We've got a team focused just on trying to integrate that data and how to integrate it, and then what do you learn from that? And what you really find is that if Colonial Pipeline themselves had to experience all these things and learn from that, we might be lucky some of the time, we might be good some of the time, but when we compare the experiences of all the companies in the association and start sharing that information, we can get better a lot faster. This is an interesting one. Expanding safety culture and management practices. The industry's been involved for at least a few years in trying to share information. We put a few more efforts into place this year that we're going to continue. Peer-to-peer meetings. In fact, I've got some folks This week, meeting with another company, trying to learn some of their hard lessons and some of the good things that they're doing. We've got another such meeting in December. We had a meeting earlier in the year, so we'll have probably 3 of these peer-to-peer meetings this year. We have what we call virtual tailgate meetings, where they're telephone calls every quarter where people in the industry call in, and a couple of people will share lessons that are very current. We have an annual conference where we get together and we have probably 15 or 20 presenters. That's once a year, and that's really very good, but you got one shot. We said, well, this is so good, we ought to try to find a way to do it more often. So now on a quarterly basis, we're making these phone calls where we share information on more relevant incidents. The challenge we have right now, and it's kind of implied in that last line, is I've talked about sharing, and for a long time, as an industry, we've talked about sharing. Well, that's great. You know, if I'm sharing information with you, if you're in the industry, and you say, that's great, and you take notes, you close your book, and you walk out, good, you have more information. But that's not learning. Learning is when you do something about what you've heard. And the challenge that we're having right now, or the challenge or the opportunity that we see, is how to take the sharings and turn them into learnings. Some of that, and you'll see some references to recommended practices, some of that is where these learnings or the sharings become learnings. We'll update a recommended practice, and now you kind of take what you've heard and you turn that into something that's an expectation for other people to follow. But that's our challenge, is to convert sharings into learnings. Leak detection capabilities, again, rupture detection. And you think, we've got great technology that will detect ruptures. I mean, I almost guarantee that we can detect a rupture pretty easily. The problem is the industry's had a couple of examples where when a rupture occurred, we didn't necessarily respond right away. And you can imagine, maybe you can, maybe you can't. I can imagine why that happens. I just said we had some hard lessons back in the 90s. Back in the 90s, you know, that's like 15 years ago. So if I have a new employee and I could put them on a simulator and I could train them and drill them, but if they have an incident, are they going to really react the way they need to because when they see that leak? And we've had some incidents lately where people have reported they've shut down the line within 3 seconds or 7 seconds. But we've had other times where there's a rupture and people didn't really believe it. It's like, surely the pipeline can't leak like that. It can't be right. And that's a culture thing. And we're trying to figure out how to deal. We can put all the bells and whistles out there, which are necessary and important and helpful, but we've got to get past that cultural piece where people aren't making the decision because they just can't believe that that's what's really happening. Okay, so that's something that we're trying to focus on from a culture standpoint. There's probably another slide that talks about culture, so I'm getting a little bit out of order here. Small leaks, big challenge. I talked about how we're a 40-inch diameter pipeline. I can tell you that it's really tough to pick up a small leak. Something that we've got a lot of tools, but it's just hard to find a small leak in a large pipeline. One of my favorites is emergency response. And I talked about that earlier in the drills. I just really believe that we've got to be good in emergency response situations. So our company's putting a lot of emphasis on it. I'm proud to say that the industry is putting a lot of emphasis on it, and I'm part of that effort. I guess I can't take credit for starting it. The Shell folks really brought it to the industry's attention as a proposal, and I just jumped on board real quick. Drills with the other first responders, other government entities, a recommended practice that we're looking to put out so that there's an expectation on the drills that are being conducted. We had an idea to put an emergency response forum to share some of the lessons learned, almost like the forum that I talked about earlier where we get together once a year and share lessons. The Emergency Response Advisory Board, I sat in that meeting last week for the first time, and this is a case where we're getting folks outside the industry to work with us and give us some advice on how to better be prepared for that emergency response. So we had people from fire department organizations, the Association of Fire Chiefs, pipeline regulators. Gosh, there was probably a dozen organizations represented. The goal from us as an industry was to share our plans on emergency response and try to get some participation from some of the other participants, okay, some of the outside participants. We really wanted other people to critique us and tell us where we could do better. That was our goal. In theory, you could say we met our goal about a minute into the program because we had such great participation from the opening. We did introduction. In fact, I don't know if we finished introductions. And we started, and it was such a positive exchange of information. Here's some things you might want to consider. Here's some other groups you want to consider. I mean, there was some great input that we got, and that was just our first introductory meeting. So we'll hold at least 2 of those a year. And our challenge will be, how do we take that information from other people, record that, and then disseminate that to other people? Now, selfishly, I enjoy being on that board because I can take the notes and I can come back. And it was Monday when I was getting a debrief on emergency response drill, I got to share some of the ideas from the advisory board. Our challenge is how do I take those notes that I had and others took and share that with the rest of the industry? That's the opportunity that we have. But boy, we had some great participation from folks outside the industry. They're looking at developing an emergency response training portal for some of the emergency responders. And then we're looking to get the NFPA codes, the fire protection codes, changed to address pipeline emergencies. And the reason we're doing that, and somebody commented, well, the NFPA is only a recommendation. It's not a requirement. But one of the people in the room, and again, this is where when you bring people from the outside, they can bring a different perspective and different information. And the people that are involved with training were saying, you know, the code is maybe just a voluntary code, but everybody trains to it. When a new firefighter comes in or when there's certain requirements to update your training, they all look to the code and train to the code. So rather than us trying to work with local fire departments and say, would you please train on pipeline incidents, by getting the code to incorporate that, we kind of cover a lot of bases and a lot of fire departments and responders of all kinds all across the country. So that was, we think that that'll be a big opportunity. Obviously, changing a code isn't going to happen overnight like that, but that we got a lot of positive feedback on that was the right way to go, and some people that felt they could help make that happen. So I think, yep. I want to share one more example from Colonial Pipeline, and I shared this with the group at the Emergency Response Board, and there was relevance to it. We had a case. When I first joined the company, I'd go around and visit the different facilities. And as I visit the facilities, I don't know, you ask questions, you know, you get the tours, and everybody's trying to take you around and guide you to where they want to take you. And I went to one facility in particular, and I started drilling them about fire plans. It was a tank farm, so I was drilling them on fire plans. And I'd gone to one facility, and a facility manager said, yep, we have. I said, like, when do you have the fire department come in? He said, oh, we have them come in frequently. I said, okay, frequently, that sounds good. I said, how often is frequently? When was the last time they were out here? And the response was, boy, I think it was like 7 years ago. Yeah, that wasn't really my reaction, but that was not acceptable. But, you know, again, frequently, it's kind of like relative, right? Well, in one particular facility I went to, and they said, oh, we have them come out once a year. I said, okay, now I've heard this one before. Is it for a fish fry, or do you actually do something? No, we have them come out here and train with us. Well, when they're training, do they actually walk out to the facility and see the? Yes, they do. I said, okay, and I didn't know this. I learned it after a while. There's not a standard fire connection, okay? There's different sizes. So I said, well, does the fire department actually make the connections at our facility? Yes, we did. Did you run fire through the hoses? Yes, we did. Are you sure that the fire water could reach the tanks? Tim, yes, they did. We've got pictures to show you. I looked at the pictures, and they had beautiful pictures of the fire, reaching the tanks. The facility manager afterwards, I'm going to say a couple of weeks afterwards, said, he said, I felt really awkward about, all those questions, and he said, I felt like I was being grilled. He said, little did I understand that was a test, because 5 days after my visit, we had a tank struck by lightning, caught on fire, and it was interesting because you can imagine how the media is going to report something like that, and they've got the fire chief microphone, and in the background is this tank burning, right? Just like you would want from a media event, and they're interviewing the fire chief, and the fire chief goes, "Yeah, we got this thing under control. Everything's fine." And he was right. We had the adjacent tanks being cooled. We were waiting for the right time to put out the fire. We wanted to make sure we had the right amount of foam. I mean, there were certain things that we were getting ready for before we actually tried to douse the fire, but everything was done just like they practiced. Okay, there was a few glitches. There were lessons learned, but it was put out, and it was because of the drilling that we did, the relationship we had with the local responders. And sometimes when we talk about emergency response, we talk about leaks. This is a different form of emergency response. And so we do our after-action report and our briefing or debriefing. And I asked the question, if we had that fire at another tank farm, would we have the same response? Guess what the answer was? Probably not. Well, shame on us if we have another tank fire and we don't respond the same way, because we know better. And as a company, if we know better, we better be prepared to respond at that same level. And so we've been going through an effort to evaluate all of our tank farm facilities, and in some cases we've had to upgrade the amount of water or the rate of water flow into the facilities. What I asked them to do is come up with a tank-by-tank fire plan, not just who is the fire department and what time will they respond and do we have enough foam, but prove to me that tank by tank on the facility that we've got the right equipment, the right water flow, and a plan to put out that particular tank. And again, we're not there yet, but I just had a meeting yesterday and reminded the people that they owe me an update on that plan. We've made a lot of progress, and our intent is to be just as good at every tank farm as we were in this particular one. And that's the same philosophy. If we have a response anywhere in the industry, we all want to learn from it. We want to be so good that we're not letting down the public because we had a failure. And people and systems are not perfect, and we know that. So if we know that, we need to be able to respond effectively. And so I get off my soapbox, but I can't talk enough about emergency response. I think I run out of time, so thank you very much.
All right, we're going to move on to our breakout sessions. Before we do that, I just wanted to mention that there was a lot of interest in the marathon public awareness, public outreach information, and it all disappeared from the table very rapidly. They've put some business cards over there on the table, so if anybody wants that information, just grab one of those cards and let those folks know. So in here is who regulates the regulators, and in the other room is pipeline safety management systems. And we've run a little long, so we'll probably let these next sessions go until 10:45 or so.